Welcome, everyone. We're very glad to have you with us today for the opening celebration of our Anthony Titus exhibition, the poetry reading by Cathy Parkhang, and a performance of Anthony Braxton's work by Erica Dicker and Dan Peck. It's really great to see so many longtime friends here and to welcome new ones. If you're new to T-Space, I'll help you with that. We're a nonprofit arts organization founded by the Stephen Myron Hall Foundation in 2010 here in the woodlands of Rhinebeck, New York. Our mission is to unite art, architecture, music, and poetry in cross-inspiration. We offer exhibitions, public events, educational programs, a nature reserve with art installations, and a new architectural archive and research library. As critic Stephen Zacks recently wrote, T-Space brings aesthetic forms together in a kind of spiritual renewal that challenges the endless commodification of culture, ecology, and the built environment. Before we get started, just a couple of announcements. After the presentations by the artists today, we'll have a conversation between the artists and questions from the audience. If you're not familiar with the Zoom webinar, the Q&A function is at the bottom of the screen. Feel free to ask questions anytime during the event. And right now, T-Space is in the midst of our annual summer architecture residency for emerging architects from around the world. You can join our virtual residency lectures with Tom Main, Keena Lesky, and others coming up next week. And our Anthony Titus show opens for in-person viewings tomorrow and by appointment every Sunday through September. And on August 27th, 28th, and 29th during Upstate Art Weekend, you can see Anthony's show those 3 days and also have a preview tour of our new archive and library. That's where Enrique and I are sitting right now. So we're very grateful to T-Space's founder, the architect Stephen Hall, who will be speaking next. Here's Stephen.
Thank you, Susan. I just want to introduce a few introductory remarks about Anthony. In the 15 years or so that I've known Anthony, I've always been amazed at his optimism and his positive outlook. He's been a critic for the last 5 years, I think, with our fellows for an architecture critic. He studied architecture at the Cooper Union under John Haydock. And I knew John, and that was one of the most respected teachers in the history of architectural education. And today, what's really exciting is we have an exhibition of Anthony's work, Anthony's artwork that's been going on. And I think this is a long overdue exhibition. And I think it really does connect the mission of our program, which is the synthesis of the arts: painting, sculpture, architecture, poetry, music. So we have all of those things in the present moment. I just want to reflect a little bit of the history of the shaped canvas. And that's really, I mean, that's kind of the territory that Anthony's working in, but in a very original way. And let's go back to 1524. Francesco Parmigianino, I can't say it right, Parmigianino, little man from Parma, Parmigianino in 1524 did a shaped canvas called Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror. That became the title of John Ashbery's most important work that he received the Pulitzer Prize for this incredible text, which ends in a poem about this shaped canvas. If you move to the 1950s, Jasper Johns did Three Flags. That's very important. But Lucio Fontana in Italy did Concerto Spaziale, a spatial concept where he sliced canvases. And, you know, Frank Stella, of course, he made some paintings that were shaped, but he was painting stripes on them. And Richard Tuttle opened up the canvas and pinned it in hexagonal shapes to the wall. Ellsworth Kelly made some big monochromatic shapes. Elizabeth Murray, probably in the 1980s, really took it in a kind of postmodern way, but these were always paintings on those shapes. And my favorite of all, and that's when I first came to New York, was Ron Gorchov. Ron Gorchov made satellite canvases. Since when I first arrived in New York in '77, I saw a show of Ron Gorchov's work, and I just thought it was fantastic. And Ron Gorchov just died last August at the age of 90. But he said this sentence: "To me, the essence of sculpture is mass. In architecture, you feel volume, and painting stresses surface." And I think what Anthony is doing here is really, I mean, I'm very surprised because what we saw about, what, 6 months ago? Yes. I was very excited about these surfaces, but they were not taken as far as he's taken these pieces. This is all the work in T-Space has been done by Anthony in the last 6 months for this exhibition. And I'm very excited about it. And it kind of reminds me about the moment, I guess it was 2016, when Pat Steer painted the whole gallery, an inside out painting, the line. She made the whole gallery dark indigo blue and painted this. You can go online and see the history of this, but you have to come and see this because it's very physical work. And I'm very excited to introduce Anthony, and he's going to make a little talk.
Thank you, Steve. So I first of all want to say thank you all for inviting me, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's an incredible honor, and it's been an incredible journey working on this show with Stephen, with Susan, with Enrique, and with Dr. Christoph Kumpusch, Jennifer Olschen. There's been a whole kind of collaboration of voices, and I'm just really thrilled to be here today. So one of the interesting kinds of challenges about constructing any exhibition is to really think about the uniqueness of that particular condition. You know, why this exhibition over any other exhibition? How can you possibly transform yourself, transform your thoughts, transform your work? And when we started speaking about this exhibition, perhaps about a year ago, you know, I really began to think very carefully about the mission of T-Space, which is about the unification of architecture, art, poetry, and the music of our time. And this is no small feat to think about, but what's so inspiring to me about the whole process is that it's very rare that you get the opportunity to think about these things in more than one way. So in the last year, obviously, we've all been pretty much caged up either within a room or on a piece of land somewhere. And I think it's a time probably to look inward. So reading things like Octavio Paz, The Labyrinth of Solitude, was very, very therapeutic in a sense, because I think when you're alone in a room, locked away, it's probably the wrong time to be making assertions about the world, because God knows all kinds of paranoia and everything else sort of builds up, and it's probably a better time to look inward. So the opportunity to work on this show really presented itself to me as a way of understanding new form, new color, and new structure. And when I began to think about what the approach could be to this space, it seemed to me that we had to do a number of things very carefully. Number one was to pay very close attention to the architecture of the space. Number one. It's very rare that you ever have the opportunity to exhibit or view works of art in a space that's been designed and conceived explicitly for the purposes of viewing art. So that was a very, very special part of this condition. The other two components that really brought themselves to the fore was the question of poetry and the question of music. And I began to think very carefully about certain poetic figures and certain musical figures. And two came to mind rather early. The first is Richard Wright, the famed African-American novelist, essayist. He passed away close to 60 years ago, but I think his work still resonates. It's still incredibly timely. And one of the more interesting aspects of his work that I was really unfamiliar with was the last phase of his work, which was the last 18 months of his life or so. He was in exile. He became very ill. He wasn't very old. He was maybe in his early 50s, I believe. And he somehow took to writing haiku, and he wrote close to 1,000 of them in the last 18 months of his life. I was unfamiliar with that body of work. So when I discovered it by chance about 9 months ago and was thinking about the relationship of poetry for the space here, I said, I definitely have to read Richard Wright. So in reading through all of his poems, a number of them struck me, and I'll talk perhaps about one of them in a few moments. The other great point of departure for the exhibition, in addition to the architecture of the space, the poetry of Richard Wright, was the music and compositional work of Anthony Braxton. Anthony Braxton is an incredible maverick and pioneer who has been practicing musical thought for close to 5 decades. And in reading his writings and listening to his music very carefully, it became apparent to me that this question of force, of internal movement, and the space between things rising and falling could really influence the way I thought about making the paintings and placing them in the space here. So where did we begin? Well, my interest in painting and architecture probably goes back a very far way to when I was a baby, actually. My 2 parents were college students when I was very young, maybe 2 years old, 3 years old, and my father was studying architecture. My mother was studying sociology, but she was also making paintings. And I always remember these very beautiful 2 paintings in particular, beautiful, small, abstract paintings, shapes of color with sanded texture. And for some reason, she kept them underneath my bed. I remember for years and years, they were just there. Sadly, like many things, they disappear over time. But my father studying architecture, my mother studying and making painting, really is maybe the beginning for me. And I really have had no other desires in life other than to be a painter and an architect. I don't have any hobbies. I've never been on vacation, and I have no plans of retiring. And this is it for me. So being in this moment where we've all been sort of inward for a year, it really allowed me to push and to look forward, but also to look back. And looking back, not as a means of nostalgia, but really as a means of perhaps trying to transform oneself and understand, how do you come out of a very difficult passage of time a different person? There are things that happen to you, but there are also things that you can do to yourself and ultimately do to the world, hopefully in the most positive of manners. So looking at these paintings and working with them was a really interesting, strange process, because this question of making, unmaking, and remaking played a critical role in almost all of the paintings that you'll see in the exhibition. There are perhaps other iterations or versions underneath them, right? So what you're seeing is not simply the final thing. And, that's the proof that I was on this journey from a very early age. That's me at the age of 15 months. You can see I have the same hair and the exact same physique now with my older sister. And from the various early days in Brooklyn with my parents, my father, not only was he studying architecture, he was always taking photographs, making home videos. As I mentioned, my mother was always painting and writing poetry or writing ideas about society, as she was a student of sociology. So from the very beginning, I thought about the merging of—
Excuse me, Anthony?
Yes.
The slides aren't moving. We're still on the mission of T-Space. So can you move the slides forward?
Really?
Yeah. The PowerPoint isn't advancing.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you for telling me that. We thought we were rocking and rolling here. All right, let's have it again.
Christoph said, best to share screen than power.
Can you see the presentation?
On the left. Oh, it just disappeared. Now I see the mission again. Don't share the PowerPoint directly. Do a share screen. then PowerPoint. Or share desktop. Thank you, Christoph.
Please be patient. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Just seeing the mission full screen. Now I see the mission full large, and then I see all of your pictures in order, tiny.
Okay, well, we'll have to do it like this. How about that? If that's fine with everyone. And I will just go through the slides in this manner. And you'll have
Okay,
to
so you'll click on them?
forgive it. Yes, indeed. So as I was speaking about Octavio Paz and just looking inward, okay, this question of looking inward, what can you do when you're alone that you can't do when you're within society? And I think the last year has sort of compelled us to all look at that. So in thinking about the work for
Someone said the PowerPoint isn't advancing, but it is.
It is now.
this exhibition, I really wanted to think about a series of paintings that would somehow speak between painting, architecture, music, and poetry. And as mentioned, this question of the sonic force of poetry, the sonic force of painting, the sonic force of architecture, this is what was of great interest to me. The process of working on these paintings, as I may have mentioned earlier, started about a year ago, as Stephen mentioned, but my interest in the relationship between poetry, music, and architecture goes way back. So that's the sort of earliest version of me and the more recent version of me. And this is the only thing I've ever wanted to do, painting and architecture. And as I said earlier, I have no hobbies. I take no vacations, and I have no plans of retiring. And at 15 months old with my older sister there, again, you can see I have the same exact hair and the same physique as I do now. And this question of being, with my family and with my parents at a very young age was important to me because, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, my father was studying architecture, my mother was painting, writing about society, and my dad was always making films. And we grew up in this environment that was incredibly creative. Some of the things, very few things that I have from childhood, I still have my father's Winsor Newton watercolor palette from when he was an architecture student. I don't think he ever used it. And I still have some of his drawings that he made as the first-year architecture student, and the 3 chairs, my mother, my father, and myself. And I would stay up with them and talk to them about things that I think were related to what I'm doing now. So what I want to try and do in this talk is really keep it very brief, but to really speak about some of the ideas and influences around the work. Because I think to see the world person is the real goal, because there are certain physical transformations that happen in natural light or in artificial light that really can't be captured in photographs. So rather than trying to sort of recreate that in a slide presentation, I'd rather give you some insight into the ideas of thinking. So for me, one of the primary questions of architecture and painting is the wall. And the way in which a painting can touch a wall or engage a wall is one of the most special things about these two. A painting can, of course, in most cases, sit directly on a wall, but we're all familiar with paintings that have sometimes been embedded within works of architecture or float independently from a wall. And this exhibition allowed me to think about that in certain ways. So paintings that could reflect, confront, could look at themselves, paintings that could express rhythmic undulation, forms which express movement, symmetry, asymmetry. These were some of the qualities that I thought about. And as mentioned at the very beginning, 3 of the really important factors that influenced the way in which we tried to approach the exhibition was to think very carefully about aspects of poetry, aspects of music, and aspects of architecture. So as mentioned earlier, the poetry of Richard Wright, again, pretty much unknown to me and probably to most people in comparison to his novels such as Black Bull or Native Son. So that was one influence. The other was, of course, the architecture of T Space, the building. And then the third, the work of musician and composer Anthony Braxton. And I think in all three cases, I wanted to try and understand the power of a single idea, a single force. So we began to look at photographs of the space. We began to experience the space physically so we could understand what the space was before we placed anything into it. And working very viscerally with models made of paper, models made of paint, allowed us to get a sense of the scale of the space and the way in which color, form, and structure could communicate. So trying to understand the geometric forces and proportional dimensions of this space was very important to us. Trying to understand and read the writings of Richard Wright and read the writings of Anthony Braxton, as mentioned earlier. And then to work. And as I mentioned, all of these paintings probably have prior histories to them. And this question of constructing, unconstructing, and reconstructing has always played a very important role in how I think about the possibility of painting. So in trying to think through these three mediums, poetry, architecture, and music, the one poem by Wright that really struck me was the number 83 haiku poem. And a falling petal strikes one floating on a pond, and they both sink. Really opened the door for me because I think it's a poem like the space of this building, like the music of Anthony Braxton, that speaks about transgression. It speaks about new possibilities. So I began to look at drawings that I've made in the recent past, drawings from travels through Japan, drawings of light, drawings of dark, and to understand where you come out on the other side. So in looking at this question of the in-between, we're now thinking about what can happen in this space. So the conception was to place 7 unique paintings throughout the volume. And the paintings would each have a very specific shape, a very specific color, and a very specific structure. And through the placement of these paintings, you really get a sense of interrelationship. So when you're in the space, it's not just one painting, it's really the ensemble of them speaking to one another across space. And again, as mentioned, there's always this question of working through something. And when I typically work, I usually sleep 2 hours a night, and I listen to music when I wake up. Music always helps me to think spatially. I think of music as being sound, but I think of it as being space. And I think Anthony Braxton's work captures that. I read when I wake up, typically about music, typically about film, as a preparation for teaching architecture. And I usually do them simultaneously. I read, I write, I listen to music, I paint, and think about architecture. And this question of wanting to bring things together has always struck me as being the most powerful thing that you can attempt to do as an artist working in the 21st century, or as an educator working and introducing young students to new possibilities in the world. Like many of us, I am an amalgamation of influences. I was born here in the United States of America in New York City. My mother is from the United States, but my father is from Jamaica. And this is a photograph of my great-grandparents, Friedrich Titus and Matilda Titus. She lived to be 101 years old, and he lived to be 75. He didn't make it as long. But my grandmother and grandfather of my father, one born in Cuba, the other born in Panama, both Jamaicans. Eventually, migrating to the United States. And, you know, the one thing that I've really been very aware of in working on this show and living through the pandemic is this question of how we end up where we are. Growing up in Brooklyn was a very interesting kind of condition because I was born in Coney Island, and for the first 5 years of my life, I lived in a pretty much hermetic, homogenous condition. It was almost completely African-American or Puerto Rican, to be specific. And within 1 year, when I went to grade school, I was bused to a school across Brooklyn. And in the bottom photograph, there were students from every part of the world, from South Korea, from China, from the Middle East, from Yemen, Pakistan, Latin America, Africa. And all of these people were just sort of pushed together. And it was very clear to me, even at that time, that almost everyone who was there came from a situation that was pretty horrific and landed in a situation that was probably not much better, but offered some possibility of betterness. And in thinking of the show, thinking about the way that forms can open in space, thinking about the question of placement, you know, one of the most memorable conditions as a child was on Martin Luther King Day in 1985. My father woke me up. We didn't have school that day. And he said, "Wake up." I said, "Yes." I said, "We don't have school today." He says, "I know. Get dressed. We're going to work." And he took me to work. I was 9 years old. I don't think child labor laws were in effect in the 1980s in New York. So we went to a construction site. He was building the interior of a brownstone in Brooklyn. And he said, "Okay, when we get on site, you're going to see people. I want you to follow them." So when we got there, there were 13 West Indian men. He said, "You see those guys? Go over there, grab a sledgehammer, and do whatever they do." And what they were doing was demolishing the interior of this building. So from 7:30 a.m. in the morning until 6 o'clock at night, he had me demolishing this brownstone with these guys. And I learned three things. One, I learned that physical labor is exhausting. Number two, I learned that walls have things in them beyond the surface, behind the surface. But I also learned that Rastafarians don't necessarily smoke tobacco. So these were three very important lessons in early life. So I've always been thinking about the space between architecture and painting, trying to find the sonic voice between. And when we work on paintings, you know, we don't just work on the paintings, we actually work on drawings before, during, and after the paintings to really try to understand other potentials. So I like to see the work as work which is open-ended to an extent, right? It has a future beyond just its moment in any one particular space or zone. And I think when you come and you see the exhibition, you will sense a lot of nuances, and many of the nuances are really a result of the works, but it's also its relation to the space, the way the light cuts through and shines upon a surface, the way it illuminates interiorities and opens the forms to different ways of inspecting them. So this is what I hope you will experience when you come to this space. And it has really been an amazing journey. And again, I really thank everyone for their patience for the first few minutes of the images not going through. But most importantly, thank everyone for allowing me the opportunity to share some ideas and thoughts with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anthony. That was very beautiful. I love seeing that. And I loved hearing, it was very personal. And I really appreciated hearing more about your history. And I also, I mean, it's been really inspiring to work with you over these past 6 months and witness such an expansion of your work, like both to see that take shape, both in increasing your scale and just the entire presence of the work is just so magnificent. So I urge everyone to come and see the exhibition. It really needs to be experienced in real life, in presence. So thank you. So this year we awarded our 9th annual T-Space Poetry Prize to Cathy Parkhang, the acclaimed poet and creative nonfiction writer. And we are delighted to host her reading today. We agree with Arthur Z., the poet who was the recipient of our last year's poetry prize, who recently noted that her exceptional poetry and breaking of many poetic norms through her experiments in form, voice, and slang dovetails with T-Space's vision. Cathy will be reading select poems from her 3 books of poetry, including Dance Dance Revolution and Engine Empire. I also wanted to mention Cathy Parkhang's extraordinary 2020 prose book on race relations, Minor Feelings, An Asian American Reckoning, which is a New York Times bestseller, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, and won the National Book Critics Circle Award. A very beautiful blend of memoir, cultural criticism, and historical analysis. She's the recipient of many important fellowships, is the poetry editor of the New Republic, and a full professor at Rutgers University. Welcome, Cathy.
Hi, I thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really honored to be the recipient of the 9th annual award, and I'm also honored to read in this space that it's always been my I've never been happy in one genre. I've always wanted to. I'm always trespassing genres, so it's very, I'm happy to be reading in this virtual space. And thank you, Anthony Titus, for that really marvelous talk. It was really illuminating. So I look forward to hearing the music afterwards performed by Erica Dicker and Dan Peck. So I think I'm just going to read, I guess I could say it's nice to kind of return to poetry. And I thought I would just read like a little sample. I'm not going to read too long, because I know how long we tend to, Zoom tends to. We all have an expiration date for Zoom, but I thought I would just read a little sampling of the poems that I've written, since, God, I guess my early 30s or so. And I'm going to start with a couple new poems. It's not even new. They're actually a couple years old. Short ones before I get into Dance Dance Revolution. Hurry ha. I want to be encored in horn-made dreams and pedal my bicycle to a dawn of dimpled lemons and sail among a regatta of cabbage moth wings upon a milken pond. I want to be irie as a pearled gibbous clouds, imping into spring and explode to a Bedouin sky of Nancing stars, an alabath of light. I want to be sweet as a bubble tea of tapioca pearls, my balls suck through a straw. I want to gather thistles and get fruity pickles. I want to lose myself entirely, ground myself to Pompeian powder, my underwear ripply as crumbly Kleenex, till the sun burns me to millipedes and cent percent spent. I can sleep among chandelier leaves, soft as Sisu's ear fuzz. This is a poem, the next little short poem. The next short poem was actually written while I was writing, right before I was writing Minor Feelings. So it has some of the same concerns or frustrations, you could say. The Voracious. A heart vein throbs between my brows. I'm incensed another joke's been made at my expense. With characters of granite schist, I hashtag a ban on all such jokes, and they, my so-called friends, pipe up. Why are you making such a stink on race? You're so poster silicon. Scuttled back to her spot as sidekick chum. My lyrics needed when they need a backup minor key to that lead singer's blues that got no core. What a snore. But what core is me, sidekick chum, torn like tendrils of bloody tenderloin, floating in the sea, heart, a stage set about to be struck. All night long, I scribbled my useless esoterica. All day long, mumblecore, I meep along. So I'm going to read, I wrote this book, my second book of poems, Dance Dance Revolution, named after the video game, or inspired by the title of the video game many years ago. And it's a book length narrative sequence of poems. It's very interested. I've been very interested in playing with different dialects. And this is a kind of a speculative book of poems where it's from the perspective of a tour guide that who's the guide of this invented terrain. It's simply called the desert. You can imagine Dubai or Vegas. And you can imagine Dubai or Vegas, and she speaks in this kind of invented dialect, which I think like over the years when I've read Dance Dance Revolution, it's just, my performance has been very wayward. I don't like, I think I've gone from using a kind of more of an Irish brogue to something more approaching an Irish and Asian pidgin, but I think, and I think over the years I've forgotten how to read this. But anyway, I'm going to read this. This tour guide is also is also a South Korean who was led an uprising or helped lead an uprising in 1980. It was an actual historical event called the Gwangju Uprising. So I'll just read two from here. Hagglers in the Bazaar. Oats scupper off like fat wingless birds from Hamaday Coralum streets. Hurdy-gurdy sounds, cricket shrieks, Omaha kit, a braided music slum set. How pops, a lime streak starled like Gertie's bloomers, firecrack the dusky violet sky. Glacade maple swine Solon Street, now we go on and eat it with $1 beer. Gash a gar, it be the sound, a dumb person, pay no mind. Gash a oi, it be the beatbox, a radish man. 1 bushel of them bitter root, a drunk swabs, a Baelish song, grapes poetica. Oh, Mary O'Doul, don't make me a fool. Turn me into a man anew. Tink, tank, tunky tunk tunk. This is a poem that goes into the tour guide's past. Song that breaks the world record. I was born on first day, oh, unrest. Huzzah, the students who fight police boy patos. In gangrene smoke, youngins through butane colas, chanted for old Contanka Reed to step down. He did. Chased out on a perma holiday, Hawaii him Elba. Fizzy ale spilling street, Korea celebrating. No money for balloon swine, Itikate parade, but Koreans have unabashed national succotash. Whole country batty drunk, aroused like Itchy Vigra man. All but my mother, Drunk medics swished out clinics to celebrate, so she all them sheself, alone in hospital, yowling from labor, but expert she is, bore 10 children whom all died before reaching age 1. Her heart, a grave, a infant's. Me tragic, mom. Breathe her pansori's breath and pop me out. My yeller father hid home, hiding from froth, a birth, labor, a revolution. Eyes boomerang out, slipshod onto blood tile floor. So happy she sang, rasp, rouse, after eyes born. Her voice so famous, a fable of myths. Even now, Samsey, you could buy her CD in the world music section. No pulling your leg. She sings song longest song ever, singing rasping rouse pain. Mind the gap, by the way. Hawking, coughing, with one beat till husking one note. Concogo. She like a bayou whaler. In stubble field, etched by winter's acid light, she retched her notes. These specters wall a sound, chilled the tympanum of all this haram, who pause, listen, he cry for being a cursed Korean, singing while carrying my bundle home, till eyes a week old, before she collapsed to her death, she hummed her last notes. A martyr spun nettle out of a silk shorn dress, a lace boot to my heart in Angyang I rest. These following poems are from Engine Empire, which, like Dance Dance Revolution, is an experiment on narration. It's about 3 different invented boomtowns. One is set in the Old West. It's sort of my critique of the Old West. The second is set in present day kind of industrial China, inspired by present day industrial China. And the third section is set in the far future, which is of a far digital future, which is actually probably not so far. But I'll just read a couple poems, I'll just read 2 poems actually from the first Old West section. These are just sort of me having fun with the Western vernacular. They're in this form called lipograms, which are poems that only use one vowel. This is called Ballad in O. Oh, boomtowns got lots of sorter, odd horrors of throwdowns, old cowboys lock horns, downtrod hobos plot to rob pots of gold. Local mobs drool for blood, howl or hoot for cottonwood blooms, throng to hood crooks to strong wood posts. So don't confront hot bloods, don't show off, go to blows or rows. Don't sob for gold lost to trollops. Don't drown sorrows on shots of grog. Work morn to moon down. Know how to comb bottom pools. Spot dots of gold to spoon pots of gold. Vow to do good. Ballad in I. Sing in this blinking twilight, in this mining district filling with pilgrims, striking it rich, wild Irish Smith spinning Christ swigging spirits, rigging spits, picking fights, swinging fists, slitting twitching skin in livid fits, crippling limbs, spitting knick, filling trim tins with hissing piss. His mind still spiting, knifing with skill, his victimizing intrinsic within his mind, grinding within his skin. Jim sings, I'm tiring, I'm tiring. His grim instinct wilting, dispiriting Jim, climbing hills hilt, drifting gin, sighing in this lilting, sinking light. Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to end with a few poems, 3 poems that I've written somewhat recently, and they're actually quite sort of still in draft form, except for the last one. And they're inspired by William Carlos Williams, at least his title, inspired by his title. It's called Spring and All. The buds of trees burst to cherry foam that no one this year shoots on their phone. In a season where diggers in white hazmat lower the dead, no mourners in sight. But did I dream that? Did I see? Repeat each day like the last. The judge at the gates of hell told the mother from Wuhan, but she replied, we live in one room and he's home. To repeat each day like the last is boredom for some, hell for others, depending on the user's profile, their longing washed away online before sand crabs again dig 1,000 tiny holes. Trypophobia is a fear of contagion, of being porous, unprotected. She wandered Wuhan's empty streets, her eyes, mouth, bruised, swollen shut, her child trailing behind her. Can't return him home, not to him. So they escort her back, weld the door shut. How many battered mothers have I known? Daughter, I love you, but leave me alone. I'm working. But look at that cherry tree. It's a giant's bouquet to a friend, she said. A testing site is a public pool, now a drained basin with weeds, once the biggest, bluest pool, a germaphobe's nightmare. But we swam in it daily until fall when school started up again. The only swimmer, an Asian, swimming way too close to my lane back in 2019. Now everything's closed, so we all go to the park for a picnic. Clouds of gnats and day drinking leaves me in a mood. There I meet a man studying to be a medium. Seen so many ghosts, might as well make money. But lately, more ghosts these days. Last night, an old woman kept me up, kept rubbing my back, he says, harassed, as if the dead are telemarketers. I should go. He masks up, rolls up his blanket, leaves me wanting. I hear a crack. My daughter killed a sapling trying to climb it. The kids today are sweet, not like the evil shits from my youth. They surround her. Don't worry, it'll grow back. Lucky to be bored with marriage, mothering, deadly bored, breathing the same stale air. At least I'm breathing, writing a poem a day in your life when each day is like every night's meat crudded on a pan. Suck me off. Oh, forget it. I haven't washed for days. Sex is boring. No one is having pandemic babies in their caves of Amazon Prime boxes, wielding a box cutter, its blade dull as always. I break down boxes, break down boxes, break down boxes, break down boxes, break down boxes until I break down. Hand scented with lavender sanitizer. Is that mildew? I jerk off. 16 at Ren Fair, perching on the kissing bridge, kissing strangers, tongue and all, till I saw girls from school say, look at these nerds trying to be sluts. Ew. Failing at that, I fall asleep, deleting an hour, a day, a year, then open my deleted folder. Oh, look, my childhood. Millions of Asian children keep European composers relevant, like Foxconn workers. They play and play. How dare you compare exploited laborers to? Then I buy a keyboard for my daughter, tell her to practice and sing along to this old ditty. Peter, Peter, pumpkin eater, had a wife, but it's snail, mom, snail. Had a snail, but couldn't keep her, put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. Night Whispers. Shush into your infant's ear so she can sleep at this late blue hour when streetlights pale, and there reflected you, stark, sodden with milk, committed to one life, whereas before you dreamed the lives of so many others. Outside, a row of planes blinking across the sky, and you wanted to be inside the white hush of a dimly lit cabin, milk buds sunk into your ears, head lolling back on sponged pillow, roaring out to Dubai or Berlin. But no, you are home among a system of white noises, fan, mechanical rabbit, tiny little machines to make her sleep, medication, days of vigilantly monitoring your own moods, recalling Cassatt, how female painters were limited to painting what's around them, potted ivy, mother washing her child's feet. Your life struck like a stage set, muted into grays, whites, rather than a pirate's treasure of liquid ruby, dormant world of soil and stars. Your private thoughts scrambled from lack of sleep. Welcomes lovely little dawn. Your own mother wakes, dreamed your newborn walked, and with one breath blew away all the furniture in the room. Like a little wind god, this is what is left. Thank you.
Thank you, Cathy. That was amazing. That was so powerful. And I loved hearing your new poems. Spring Blossoms was just astounding. So we thank you so much for your reading. It was really great. Okay, so I'm really getting these nice sort of ricocheting thoughts going back and forth between Cathy and Anthony Titus. And I think you'll see some in Anthony Braxton as well. Anthony Braxton, as Anthony Titus mentioned, is the great experimental composer, saxophonist, and multi-instrumentalist. His approach to music challenges the traditional dichotomy between improvisation and composition and relies on innovative graphic and symbolic musical notations. 7 years after premiering Anthony Braxton's Falling River music in a sextet with Braxton himself, violinist Erica Dicker and tuba player Dan Peck were married. They continue to champion the work of their existential matchmaker, performing Braxton's music and serving as educational ambassadors for his nonprofit Tricentric Foundation. Erica is an active chamber musician, free improviser, and instructor in the New York City area. Dan serves as principal tuba in the New York City Ballet and plays in experimental music ensembles. Erica and Dan's duo, Blood of the Stars, explores the ultraviolet and infrared possibilities presented by their unconventional instrumentation. So here are Erica Dicker and Dan Peck playing composition 341 from Anthony Braxton's Ghost Trance Music series, which they performed in Anthony Titus's exhibition at T-Space last week. I am unmuted. Thank you, Erica and Dan. So I wanted to open it up to discussion between the artists and the Q&A. I did have one question first for Erica and Dan. You know, as we've discussed, Anthony Braxton uses visual notations and composes music in spatial geometric color forms in the scores that you showed me last week when you were performing in the gallery. Can you tell us a little more about this and what it's like to play such scores, and also why you picked this composition 341 to play for us?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Dan.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I mean, Anthony, Titus, everything you were saying earlier.
We're not hearing you. Are you unmuted?
We are unmuted.
Try again.
We are unmuted. Can you hear us?
now?
Oh.
Everyone else can hear. Maybe it's fine.
We can
Everyone
hear.
else can?
I can hear you. We can hear you here at T-Space.
Okay.
Okay.
We can hear you at T-Space.
So, as you were saying, Dan.
So Susan, maybe I'll just go ahead, but
Okay, good.
oh, okay. Well,
Okay.
as,
Sorry.
well, Anthony Titus was talking earlier just about being inspired by Braxton's use of space, and that's something that definitely resonates with us. I mean, both in terms of sonic spaces that his music gets into, so visually, and then also in terms of like the architecture or the kind of overarching structure of the pieces that he composes. And then in turn, something Anthony was saying about the interconnectedness of the pieces in the T-space. So they're kind of pieces of themselves, but they all relate to each other. And that's that kind of interconnected or modular use of different compositions also is very in line with how Braxton approaches his composition pieces. This particular piece, it's just something we have been working on, I think, when we got approached about this, and it seemed to, from the talks we had with Anthony Titus, seemed to make sense with all of the aesthetic stuff that we were talking about. Does that answer your question, Susan?
I made a little sketch. I really like the materiality, because your materiality is so pure, just two. You know, you have the high string and the deep brass, and he has the glossy paint and the warped canvas. So somehow everything you did, I just wish, you know, we could do it inside of here. But let me ask you this: why did you choose to do it from the balcony? I mean, we're sitting here now, and I was thinking, wow, they went up there. That, like, I mean, it would have been nice if the gallery would have been full of people, because you could have been playing up there. But why did you choose to do it from up there?
Just in order to sort of help, because the acoustic is so huge, just to sort of help condense the sound.
Okay.
Ideally, like, it would have been played live in the space and actual human beings present in the space
Right.
would also
Right.
help the resonance. So just
Right.
in order to make the best recording, we all thought that up there might be the best decision. Also, though, I just wanted to quickly bring it back to sort of the compartmentality of, or like the components of this piece. So composition number 341 was simply a framework for this performance. What's really incredible about Anthony Braxton's music is that he's very deliberately created systems to interconnect all of his works. And that particular system, or the most important system, is his ghost trance music. And so composition number 341 is a ghost trance piece. And then I'm going to just quick put in the chat, we included 4 other compositions, as well as his language music, which is sort of a notated, like a notational catalog of sound, like a visual catalog of sound that we used to improvise and sort of connect things. But these are the other pieces that we played. I just put in the chat. So
That's so much material. It's so rich. You know, we were introduced to Anthony Braxton only 3 years ago by one of our fellowship students here at T-Space. We were doing the architectonics of music, music and architecture, and how they influence a little pavilion. And he came in with these Anthony Braxton scores, these beautiful, weird diagrams with strange colors in them. I wish we would have had that somehow. Maybe we can put that online as part of this discussion, because that was what grabbed me. And then I was introduced, you know, I went and I did more and more research. And I thought I knew a lot about music, but obviously I don't, because I just discovered, you know, I knew John Cage. I love John Cage's work. Morton Feldman, I did buildings based on patterns in a chromatic field. And I mean, you know, then just discover Anthony Braxton. I think we have to do more work. I hope he sees this and he can see this artwork, because there's something really related, and also the colors, the chromatic way he makes his scores is related to these. Well, maybe you made that. Maybe you did that on purpose.
Well, you know, the one thing that was really fascinating, and, you know, in coming across the notational works of Anthony Braxton, Mr. Braxton, as I call him, you know, it was really a great revelation to see these scores that were as visual as they were sonic, you know. So when I started looking at those drawings and in the process of working on these paintings, you know, as I said earlier, you know, this question of the sound of vision, or the vision of sound, was really critical to me. And I think many of the drawings and the almost collage-like compositional works are just really very inspiring, very unique and rare and original. So
I want to try to bring poetry. I mean, you started with Wright's Haiku Poems. Right now, we all know that haiku is a 17-syllable structure, 5-7-5. It contains what's called a kirigi, a cutting word. It contains a kigo, a seasonal reference. Haiku is a very precise form of writing poetry. I happen to love haiku. I try to write haiku myself. But I started today with John Ashbery, and self-portrait in a convex mirror is closer to Cathy's. I think it's conversational in a sense, the way John Ashbery wrote, conversational structure with surrealism mixed in some way, you know, I mean. So, and then, but Cathy, you said something really interesting, and I never really got it. You said it was an experiment in narration, and you said it was a lithogram, poems that only use one vowel. Could you, I mean, that's kind of and when I talk about haiku being very structured, you know, 5-7-5, and then John Ashbery is a narrative, but then you're exploring another material, another structural type, right?
Yeah, that's actually based on you know, there was this avant-garde group of international poets called they were called Oulipo poets, and their whole modus operandi was to make up different forms out of constraints, procedural constraints or mathematical constraints. And one of their kind of inventions was called the glypogram, which is you could either use only one vowel or not use another vowel. So a big example of that is George Perec, who wrote a 900-page novel without the use
Oh,
of the
right.
letter E, which is the most common.
George
common
Perec, yes, I have,
letter.
right.
Yeah, and George, and John Ashbery was also part of the Oulipo group
He was.
as well. Yeah. So it's not that, it's not so far off actually.
So,
And
did you,
I mean, I think I'm very much, I was definitely influenced by Ashbery at the time, just like his sort of more maximalist aesthetic of using different modes of speech. But then at the same time, I also am very much attracted to constraint too.
great, Ashbery was a Hudson Valley poet. I used to ride with him on the train from Rhine, I would get off in Rhinebeck and he would go to Hudson. And here we have an archive. Susan's in the archive now. You see all those books behind Susan. We have an archive that's going to be open to people from Bard College or whatever, making an appointment. And I think I have every John Ashbery book, and some of them are signed by him. So that I really feel that that's a kind of connection. In 2017, when he died, a lot of different texts came out about his importance as a poet, as he stood for a real pluralism, he was, there's more dimensions to him that I think they're just being discovered now after he's gone. Of course, that always happens, but I'm really excited to see where you go with connecting to John and going forward. And as an architect, I have to say that what I love about today also is that, we always say that structure is 25% of the cost of a building. And therefore, it ought to have some relationship to the meaning of the building. And what I love is we have that going on in Anthony's work, because the shaped canvas structure, he's taken it further than Ron Gorchov, or certainly than Frank Stella. He's taken it further. So, but there's a simplicity and a kind of precision. And then to use high gloss paint, limiting these two things, like all art has limits. And I think that these limitations help us. I mean, haiku poetry is great because of the limitations of 5-7-5 structure. Try to stick with it, try to do something with it. So for me, there's a kind of relationship to Cathy's experimental work because of the insistence of trying to make some kind of limit that you try to work within, and then it creates something, in music, of course, we know the history of music, that Schoenberg invented the 12-tone system, and that became a revolution in music. And everybody was working with that structure that was very weird, every row and every retrograde row had to contain every one of the 12 tones. And finally people had to break out of it. But what it did was it changed the history of musical composition. And I think that's kind of an architectonic.
Yeah.
So, when people say, what is the relation between music, architecture, poetry, and painting? There's a lot of relations, and mathematical and limitations and structural form. And I think that's what's exciting about this event today. It's the kind of interrelations. And I have to say that I really prefer this format, this virtual format. Now we're opening the gallery. There's going to be people here, a few people with some glasses of wine. But we used to not be able to have these discussions because everybody, was just drinking wine and saying what they did yesterday, which is like an opening in a gallery in the Chelsea. There's nothing that's ever said there that's very consequential. So I really prefer, and I hope we will go forward with this virtual discussion. And Anthony, what did you think? You've been to some of these openings where there was no discussion, right?
Well, this is true. I mean, what I really appreciate about this particular afternoon is hearing the kind of cross voices and listening to Cathy's poems and hearing Erica and Dan speak about the performance and of course the interaction between the audience, yourself, it's very dynamic. And I think there's perhaps a third condition that comes from this, which wouldn't happen in any other way. I mean, one other quick thing perhaps I would say about the relationship between the music, the architecture, poetry, and painting is that I see them all as having forces, so to speak. Forces that are underlying form. And through a very careful limitation of those forces, you produce a specific form. So haiku, a specific form, or a certain kind of musical format. Or in my paintings, they're sort of thought about as having one color so that there's a unifying agent. And within that single color, you can have many different movements, many different surfaces, textures, and directionalities. So this question of limit, I think, is very important and critical. And I really am so thrilled to hear Cathy read and to hear and see again Dan and Erica perform.
I think they're bringing up some of the Braxton scores right now. Can everybody see those?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna give you a quick, this score that I have here on a PowerPoint on my screen. This is a piece that was written directly after the one we used as our framework for today's performance. Braxton often, I believe personally, he's never confirmed this, that he's synesthetic and responds
Yes.
color. And so he often includes these wonderful legends that relate to his whole catalog of sounds and extended techniques. But interestingly, his whole life's goal has been to write a series of interconnected operas and sort of, I don't know, like multi-dimensional experiences for all friendly experiencers to kind of take part in. And so these symbols can also represent choreography or sounds, or I mean, like just human-made non-instrumental sounds or aspects of a larger environment. So I'm sorry they're so small. This first score that we had, this is the Falling River music that Dan and I premiered when we first met. But you can also see his graphic notation kind of threaded throughout this larger, more evocative painted area, this larger texture.
But that's one of his drawings, right? That's one of his.
Exactly.
Well, here you have, this is probably the beginning point of, I mean, it reminds me of those watercolors that John Cage did. John Cage did a number of watercolors that led to certain musical scores.
Exactly. And yeah, so then these are sort of the 12 overarching, like this is the Reader's Digest version of his entire catalog of notation. And that's what we were kind of, when you saw Dan and I signaling numbers to each other, these were those numbers. So like 1 would be a long sound, or Dan would give me a 3 and we'd play trills on cue, or angular attacks. These all sort of contributed to our performance.
Erica, I'd like to just interrupt for 1 second because I have a message that Cathy has to leave, and she has a long drive to see her relatives today. So I just wanted us to be able to say thank you to Cathy. And
I have a kind of final note that I wanted to play in relationship to the whole thing. Could I play that before she leaves?
sure.
Thank you.